We're gonna talk about more to be. We're gonna talk about being about more than the PAC and raising money, right? I'm gonna talk about him, how he hangs out. I remember him at R&R. How far we come, we dance on tables.
Hey man, that was part of networking. Goddamn
It was,
God
sure,
damn
but
it.
yeah, I was hurt on Fridays most of the time.
God damn it.
The networking was real.
Wow.
All right.
Everybody has a Ben Branch story. Everybody has.
A good one. A good Ben
It's
Branch
okay.
story.
Oh dear.
Everybody has.
So
a Ben
with
Branch
that,
story.
as you hear a little bit of this back and forth banter, welcome back everybody to the Hip Politics Podcast. We're back for another week. This is affectionately known as the Super Bowl of Black Politics, CBCF Annual Legislative Conference Week. And we have one of the legends, the recent legends in the building. But first, you got your boy Cam Trimble, your co-host here, a.k.a. Mr. Hip Politics, a.k.a. Mr. Communicator of Color, a.k.a. 216 to the 202. Then you've got, to my left, is my co-host, Mr. Michael McQuarrie.
Hey, what's up, family? I'm back in the saddle again. I see you did a show a couple weeks ago, and I wasn't there. I just wanted to make sure I didn't get kicked off, so I'm here.
Man,
On time.
first of all, good and well when that show was shot in Miami.
It took me 2
and
days
you
to
weren't
look
there.
at it, though, because I was a little bit upset, because my voice wasn't being there nowhere. I said,
Then I was in Miami for, and I interviewed
we get off
the.
topic being real
Oh,
quick.
no,
before
I
we get-
totally
this is how we
understand.
go.
Totally
I just
understand.
want to get that on the record. Just let you know how I felt, and now we can move on to other things now.
And to our far left, we have our guest today. If you've been around the political circles, whether it be, especially if you've been around Black political circles here in D.C. for the last decade plus, anything to do with the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus PAC. He's a former legislative director for Congressman Gregory Meeks of New York. Just a well-known, connected brother who kind of he's a Mr. Make It Happen, I like to call him. The former executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus Political Action Committee, Mr. Benjamin Branch. Ben Branch, what's up, man?
Thank you, fellas, for having me. I'm really honored that you would have me on the podcast. As most people know, I generally don't get out and do a lot of talking. I kind of
don't.
I don't.
This is a big get.
Behind the scenes.
This is a big
No,
get
I,
for
mean,
us.
I watched the Netflix special about Clarence Avant. He's like, look, I don't like to be in the limelight. I like to be.
Oh, the Black Godfather
Yes,
one?
Black Godfather, man. That's
I had no idea who that guy was until I
Exactly,
watched
that's
it,
the
and I
point.
was like, "Oh my gosh, this dude
Yeah.
put everybody on."
that's the point, man. I mean, I'm never. I've had a number of opportunities to speak, and when I was executive director, for the CBC PAC, a lot of news outlets would reach out to me and ask me to do radio and television. I just sort of shied away from it because I'm from the country, man. I live my life by Ettrick, Virginia. So
I never heard of that.
Yeah, if you go to it's right beside Petersburg, Virginia. So that's generally where I say where I'm from. But Ettrick is so small. When you actually go, it's a sign that says the village of Ettrick. It's that small. It's really it's a pretty small town. So
I know where I got a good friend of mine from Howard that went from Petersburg, and I've driven through there, but I've
I
never
had
seen
a
that
Petersburg
sign.
zip code address, but I lived in Ettrick, Virginia, man. So
Ettrick,
it's pretty small, man. But like I said, man, and we, I come from a family where we just, our whole mantra was just service and, let our work speak for us. When folks down in our family, we sing country songs. May the work we done speak for us. And if I could help somebody, my work will be in vain. So that's kind of the mantra from what I came from and stuff. So I mean, I'm not really the person that wants to be out there with all of the accolades and everything. I mean, I like to just get stuff done, man. And I mean, if hopefully the money and success and everything else will follow. So.
No, wow. Oh, well, we got a lot to talk
I've been
about.
knowing,
Because I
I've
want to
been
know.
knowing Ben for like over 20 years. I just
20
found-
years?
I found out where he's from. That's the first time
Yeah,
I found out
man.
where he was from.
Yeah, man.
No, it's okay.
Well,
I might put this on social media. We never know.
I mean, there's a little known history page. Somebody would say, tell me where Ben is from. I'd be like, I don't know. I had no idea.
I had no idea. For some reason, I thought you was from Texas.
Nah, I mean, I get Texas, I get New York a lot because I work for New York member.
I knew you weren't from New York from going in there all the time, and you were like, I ain't from New York.
Yeah.
So I knew that, but I always thought it was Texas for some reason.
Nah, people think when I say Virginia, generally people think I'm from like Northern Virginia, but nah, man, I'm from
the country.
Yeah, Virginia. Yeah, man. So I think we have we're up to maybe 6,000 people in there, something like that. Yeah, so it's a pretty small town.
Well, before we jump into your story and some questions, make sure I hope you got your top 5 ready to go at the end.
Debate me on that, please.
Yes, we will. We will.
No, you will. My top 5 still the same, so ain't no sense in arguing. Oh, you already giving it away?
Oh, with the Brooklyn's finest.
Oh,
see,
if you need, hold on.
We're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that. Okay. We just wanted to do a couple announcements. This, like I said, this is CBC Annual Legislative Conference Week. We're having our first annual Hip Politics Congressional Awards reception, which is like a huge deal. So like the podcast, the brand is really like going to another level. It's going to be this Thursday, September 12th from 4 to 7 p.m. We're honoring a slew of people, but in the yes, on the I'm sorry about that. Yeah, we're honoring a bunch of kind of hip hop greats, elected officials, and social justice warriors. We got Trey the Truth out of Houston for all his work with Trey Day, all the stuff he's done post Hurricane Harvey. He's just been a real big figure in hip hop. He's kind of like an underground legend. But like I said, he's super impactful, super respected throughout the game. He's coming. We'll be in the building getting an award. We also got Brad Jordan, better known to the masses as Scarface, legendary hip hop. Legendary hip hop pioneer lyricist from Houston as well, who's running for city council in Houston. He's going to be in the building. We have the Honorable Congressman Akeem Jeffries, the co-founder of the Congressional Hip Hop Caucus out of New York, and the current chair of the Democratic Caucus. So one of the most importantly, what?
A member of Kappa Alpha Psi.
And a member of Kappa Alpha Psi, yes. In which Ben has been in.
Of course. We was going to get to that, too.
We're going to get to that, too. We're honoring the guys who put together the Broccoli City Festival. We're honoring a young student, Jamison Ford, from the Black Swan Academy. Pastor Ezra and First Lady Katrina Tillman of First Trinity Missionary Baptist Church in Flint, Michigan. They've been like the number one social drivers in terms of getting clean water to the people of Flint, and so many more people. So check it out on hippolitics.org /events and go on the website to RSVP. The list is crazy right now.
Live stream?
Yeah, it won't be live streamed, but we are videotaping, and we got a videographer and a bunch of photographers and some media that'll be on hand. So you'll hear about it, and we got social media interns. So actually, I take that back. Yeah, one of the social media interns will probably either Facebook Live it or
that'd be kind of hot.
Yeah, or Instagram Live. At least the part of the ceremony part, but it's gonna be a nice turn up afterwards. Trey the Truth is actually doing a free silent listening party. Just put out an album that's going to be at Eden Lounge from 7:30. That'll be from 7:30 to 10. Free for all fans. That'll be dope. And then Mike, what you got coming up?
I'm not ready to talk about that yet because haven't looked it up. Nice try.
Okay. All right. Well, that's for Hip Politics. That's going to be our big. It's kind of our big launch. It's no longer a soft launch because like we've been doing the podcast. See, Ben, we've been doing the podcast. We had the debate party, but we partnered with the Young Democrats on that. Okay. And it's been a soft launch, but this is like us stepping out there. Like, all right, we're here, we're doing it.
Okay. And I didn't see none of either of those debates. Okay. Two parties.
No, I came to one of the debate watching. You remember I came for a little bit and I ended up stepping out. But I came. I showed my face. The one that was a barcode. I showed my face.
Oh, yeah.
You came to support it.
We appreciate it. The barcode was a blur. We started drinking good up in there.
We did. Well, so this is, and that was one of the reasons why, with this being, obviously, like I said, CBC Week, as is affectionately known, here in D.C. circles. One of the big reasons we wanted to have you on, because like I said, even though you're on the low, you're not on the low.
I know. If you know, you know.
If you know, you know. And if I know Ben's you've been off the hill now for what? I mean, you've been off the hill for
9 months.
9 months out of the spotlight, and his phone is still probably blowing up, going off right now. Like, hey, can I get a VIP for this on a Sunday?
I mean, yeah.
People know he might be in church, people, and people still shooting off text messages and calls.
Made a work side done. Speak for me off the gospel meeting. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, so that's this week. I suggest all of our listeners and our viewers on YouTube, IG, social, or if you're hearing this, go check out the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's website. Learn more about the ALC Annual Legislative Conference, the Phoenix Award dinners, all the different panels, workshops. It's really going to be, it's by far the biggest gathering of black kind of political leaders, elected officials, people out here, political action and social justice leaders from around, business leaders from around the country. So this is going to be, if you can make your way to D.C. sometime between Wednesday and Saturday, do that. Like you always come away with something. There's tons of great parties and receptions in the evening. What we were kind of talking about a little bit beforehand. So yes, if you're gonna be here a whole week, pace yourself and hydrate. Yes, but to kick off the podcast, Ben, coming from Eckridge, Virginia. Ettrick. How do you spell that?
Ettrick.
Learn something new.
All right, Ettrick, Virginia. How did you make it to D.C. and literally in the fray, in the mix, and to be able to move around on Capitol Hill and post Capitol Hill and raising millions of dollars for so many different organizations?
It was sort of happenstance, actually. When I was in college, well, let me even backtrack. I mean, I barely got to college, if I'm being quite honest with you. I mean, a lot of people don't really know that story, but I was, I barely, graduated from high school. I wasn't one of the best students. I wasn't close to A student or B student. I was like a,
getting out of school.
happy to be there. And I mean,
your pants.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if I'm being real, I grew up in the 90s, in the mid 90s, where we were at that epicenter of like hyper black male masculinity. So it wasn't even cool to be smart. You got beat up if you were smart. So it was one of those things. And so I went to junior college, and I just was way better. I excelled. Everything that wasn't in high school, I became in junior college. And so then I transferred to Old Dominion University, and, with the hopes of being...
ODU.
Yes. Norfolk, represent VA, 2 up, 2 down. But I ended up going to Old Dominion, and I wanted to be a history teacher. And so... I was a major in history, but I was focusing in particular on African American history, and it was funny because there weren't a lot of courses and stuff geared towards African American history, and I remember I was taking a Virginia history course once, and it was me and another black guy in the class, and if you look at the history of Virginia starting in the 1600s to now, I mean, it just wasn't, it was marred in, racial, just racial violence and disenfranchisement and just, systemic, systemic means to keep black people suppressed. And so, every time they would say something with respect to black people, they would turn around and look at the 2 black guys in the class. And I remember it was even one time a former governor named Mills Godwin came to our classroom. And Mills Godwin, he was one of those Republicans that sort of switched his tune. He initially said something to the effect of, and don't quote me, but the quote was something similar to that if black people are allowed to integrate into society, it'll become like the amalgamation of society, something to that effect. And so later, a few years later, he essentially changed his tune, when the political winds changed. And I remember actually questioning him on that. And so that sort of began my foray into politics and my interest in the politics, because it was, one of those things where I was like, look, as all of these things are systemically happening to black people, a lot of it is happening in the political sphere. And I felt like, I wanted to be in the room and have an impact. So that's when I started to read about, people that I would later work for and work with, the John Conyers, Maxine Waters, John Lewis. And so, I started to read about them then. So that kind of, led me to switch my major over to political science. And so I actually ended up graduating with a degree in political science. So from there, in college I had two internships. One was with the former governor and then later on Senator Charles Robb from Virginia, and he ended up losing to George Allen. You remember George Allen from Macaca? So
were you in his Virginia office or in his D.C. office?
I was in his district office.
Okay.
I was in his district office. I did a day or two up here in his D.C. office to just kind of see, how, just to kind of get a feel for D.C. I actually have a picture of my place. It's like this really big oversized suit. I actually had hair back then. But that's when he took us around Russell. And so we had like 2 days of just working in the Russell office building. But it was really funny because that was, very early in the 2000s. And that's one thing I noticed was that there was nobody black up here, which I'll get to that later. But, when I left there, that was, my first internship. And then when I graduated, I had an internship at the Virginia General Assembly. And, a lot of people that actually really know me, they know this story. I actually interned for two Republicans. And it was funny because they, it was a program through Old Dominion, and they actually placed us with respective delegates, and we didn't really have a choice in terms of the delegates. And I was so happy to get a stipend because I was broke at the time, and a place to live in Richmond. I was like, fine. So I actually worked for one delegate. Her name was Terry Sewell, and another one was actually named Bob McDonnell. He's a Republican who became governor later, got convicted and so forth. A lot of people don't know.
Hold up, Terry Sewell, not the Alabama Terry.
No. I'm sorry, Terry Suit. Terry Suit, not Suit. Terry Suit.
Okay.
Yeah, but Terry Suit. But what ended up happening is that, and I would say I learned, it was an interesting experience. And but funny enough, even there, as you talk about connecting, a lot of the connections that I made there were through a lot of the Democratic offices. I remember there was one state representative named Viola Baskerville from Richmond, and she actually later gave her seat up so that state senator now, Jennifer McClellan from Richmond, could actually help run for her seat. But I just remember I would go into like a lot of the African American delegates' office, and I would just be like, I can't write this. I can't write this letter. I can't help. It was difficult.
Coming from a Republican standpoint.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is, the internship ends, and I go up to come up here to D.C. in search of a job, and I was up here for probably about a little under 8 or 9 months, and I'm looking for a job, and I'm passing out my resume to whoever.
I feel you. It took me 9 months to break into the hill too.
I was grinding, brother, and it was funny because I actually no, it was 6 months. It was 6 months. I got here in March of 2003. Met brother Mike McQuarrie, and I started just going to places where people were. I remember I would walk up to just with an oversized. I had one oversized suit, and I had some slacks and another blazer to go with it, and I would just recycle those outfits. You probably saw it like 10 times. You probably remember. And I would go in, and I would just run up on just different events and receptions, just walking around Capitol Hill with a bag of resumes. And it's funny because a lot of those people, I had so many informational interviews, with just a number of people people that I'm friends
Coffees
with today. Eric Mitchell sat in his office. He was in John Lewis's office. You remember that? Sat in his office.
Right.
You, all these people, Malik, all these, and the irony was just that, like, at the time I was like, oh, it's a good contingent of black people. No, absolutely not.
About 2 or 3.
Nobody black up here at all. And so eventually I met a young lady who worked in Albert Wynn's office at a party, out of all places. And at the party, I just happened to have my resume on me because that's how hungry I was. And I had it in the car. So I went back to the car and gave her a copy of my resume at the car and at the party. And then like 3 days later, she called me and for an interview. And, it was actually during the August recess, and former Congressman Albert Wynn walks into the building. He happens to be my fraternity brother. I grip him up. He brings me into the office during the August recess, and I start to meet with him directly. I was actually supposed to meet with the chief of staff in retrospect, that doesn't happen often where you meet the member first and start and get the interview first with no supervision. So
right place at the right time.
Yeah, right place at the right time. And so I met with him, and the rest is essentially history. I know that it's funny because I actually had given myself a date that if I hadn't found a job by mid-September, September 15th, 2003, I was going back to Petersburg with Exec. And to be a substitute teacher and to ultimately be a teacher, and I got hired on September 3rd, 2003.
Look how God works.
Yeah.
So. No, that's a story.
Yeah.
That's a good story.
I was a political science major too.
Yeah.
So
and then as we're talking, through the ranks, that was a while ago, but and then I started off as a staff assistant. Oh, sorry. Started off as a staff assistant. And I was. Let me tell you, I was happy to be a staff assistant, man. It's funny because now,
I was happy too.
Man, I was so happy to answer that damn phone.
This has kind of been like a recurring theme. Like as we've interviewed we interviewed Wakenya. We've interviewed a few people who made their path through Capitol Hill, and the coffees, the amount of time, the grind, the having resumes on deck, it always seems to work out happenstance where you keep pushing, and then Congressman Wynn, who happens to be your fraternity brother, you happen to already be there at the right time, right place, and I'm ready for the opportunity when it presents. And then I'm not too big headed to where you only gonna pay me what to do what?
Yeah.
Nah, get your foot in the door.
I was so happy to answer that phone, and it's just funny because it's just when I talk to a lot of younger people on the Hill nowadays, I'm like, look, man, you have power. One of the first things I wrote down about, connecting and networking is that everybody's somebody, especially in this space, and that space has evolved. So, and as I joke and say, today's intern is tomorrow's chief of staff. Hell, I was just told you a story. I'm interning, we all been there. We all been there through the grind, and a lot of times it happens quick. You just never know, that trajectory and how fast it could happen.
And now fast forward, that was 2003. Now in 2019, I probably met you. You met Mike then. I might have met you probably, 2010, 11 maybe?
Oh, yeah.
Somewhere around there. My first year or two on the Hill.
Yeah.
When I got involved in CBA, Congressional Black Associates.
Yeah.
And you always, at least by then, you had already started to attain some of your powers because everybody's like, "Oh, you need to." But what I wanted to talk to you about was you were always well known. One, you were on the Hill, and then you transitioned over to the CBC PAC as both knowing members, knowing staffers, knowing members, knowing staffers, and then also knowing as a fundraiser, just in terms of knowing how to put the right people in the room.
Yeah.
How did you carve that space out in your career? Because I'm not sure how. I know you were a legislative director. I'm assuming because your boss was on financial committees and stuff like that.
Well, actually, it wasn't. It was a little That wasn't quite the case. It was. It's interesting because when I left Al Wynn's office, and I might add, when I left Mr. Wynn's office, well, I actually started from Mr. Wynn's office. Staff assistant for 2.5 years, and I will be honest, I was frustrated after the 2.5 years. I was like, look, haven't moved up. I'm doing legislative issues. I'm actually handling policy, but I'm still, answering the front desk, right? Answering phones at the front desk. And, all of a sudden, people just started leaving, and they started to go on to bigger and better things, and, folks started lobbying and, going to different campaigns and doing different things. And so I started to move up really quickly within the office. And so I remember this. It was in 2005. I went from being a staff assistant to a deputy legislative director in less than 8 months. In 8 months. So you went from the front
only on Capitol Hill.
Only on Capitol Hill. Right. And so I did that. And so then, we ended up taking back the House in 2006. Which was a monument, which was a huge change at that point in Washington D.C. as a whole, but in particular in Capitol Hill, because you started to see a mass influx of folks of color on the Hill.
You're saying that's like 06?
Yeah, 2006.
Right. Yeah, I guess that was that last That was the Democratic wave that preceded Obama.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, because I started, as I mentioned, when I was started and Mike was there, it wasn't a lot of African Americans on the Hill at all. And so what ended up happening was, you started, you mentioned CBA. But I remember when CBA meetings, you could go to CBA meetings, it would be 8, 10 people there maybe. It was, Mike would tell you, it was nobody there. Nobody would show up. And it was just like, but it was a very close community, and so that's where a lot of the closeness. I was talking about CBA, how it used to be before 2006, when a lot of people came into the Hill. I was just saying, like, you could go to a CBA meeting, it would be like 10 people there. Yeah. And so, but a lot of the black people that were on Capitol Hill at that point, we were very close because we were essentially it. We were all that we had. Yeah, it was just us. So, what ended up happening was, I left and I went to a telecom trade association, and I was making a little bit of money. It was cool, but I really had never really had the chance to work on Capitol Hill in the majority. So I wasn't, and I looked at all of these new people, and I ain't gonna lie, it was a lot of pretty women on the Hill, and it was like you were back in college. Yeah, it was like back in college. It was like back in college. But no, it was just like a lot. Everything was just happening on the Hill, and I just felt like I was missing out on a lot of the things that were happening. People were actually able to get bills passed, and people were able to get their amendments through, and stuff in the manager's amendment, stuff that we just weren't able to really get done in a majority. And as I said, on the social aspect, it just was a lot. It just seemed a lot more fun, and just just welcoming, with a lot more African Americans.
So how long did you stay away before you came back?
A little under a year, probably about like 11 months. So then there was a position that was open, came open in Congressman Meeks' office, and so it was my predecessor, this guy named Mike McKay, who a lot of folks know in the area. He's very, very, very successful lobbyist here in D.C. And, Mike and I were working out at the gym one day, and I was just telling him how I miss working on Capitol Hill and, all the things that were happening, and I miss, they getting all this stuff done. He was like, well, look, I'm going to be leaving at some point soon. Would you be interested in working for Mr. Meeks? And I said, sure. And so I said, well, what do you do for Mr. Meeks? He was like, well, I do legislative policy issues, but in addition to that, I'm his political director and finance director, essentially. And so I was like, oh, well, I've never done money. I was a little reluctant, I was just like, hey. So he was just like, man, look, I think you'll be a natural at it. He was like, you're personable, people, I think folks will like you. And so I said, fine. So that's how I ended up my first foray into actually dealing with money. And so, the thing about it was this, especially at that time, it was money in politics was in particular Democratic circles, in particular Black, it was very much a taboo conversation. Like, you just didn't, it wasn't like today where a lot of staffers are aware of, hey, look, when their boss goes around the corner, for that hour or two, they go into the DCCC to raise money. They know they're well informed about certain parts of the fundraising process. And so to a degree, I was, once I got adjusted into Mr. Meeks' office, I was a little unapologetic about the fact that there was a lot of disparities when it came to fundraising. And so I talked about that to my colleagues and to my peers. And so, I was kind of an originator when it came to one of the people on Capitol Hill who would just say, hey, look, there is money in this game, and we have to actually have those real discussions when it comes to the disparities between members of the CBC to the non-college, to leadership PACs and so forth.
I want to unpack that a little bit more. So you noticed that essentially, I'm hearing Black members didn't have as much money, weren't raising as much money, didn't have as much money in their campaign coffers as some of their white counterparts, even though they're representing some really big cities, they're representing some of the most largest urban areas, where there is money, where there is business. They've got influence. I know it's not like it was now where half of the congressional committees are chaired by
right, exactly,
it wasn't like that.
Exactly.
But you identified that, and so who did you speak to? Did you speak to members of Congress? Did you speak to staffers, their campaign teams?
It was weird because I just started doing a lot of my own individual research, and you would see, and in doing your research, you would see, you could look at a committee, right? And I'm not going to point out any individual committee, but you could look at a committee, right? And you could see, we're all in the majority, right? And you could see one member of the CBC who votes a certain way, the exact same way as a non-CBC member. Yet a company would give that member, the non-CBC member, a $5,000 maximum contribution, but the CBC member might get $1,000 or $20 or $2,000 or $2,500. What's the difference? We both vote the same. They're in the safe seat. My CBC member's in the safe seat. What's the difference? But at this time, I'm just doing it solely for Mr. Meeks. And so what ends up happening is this, that Mr. Nguyen was the chair of the CBC PAC. Now, when Mr. Nguyen was the chair of the CBC PAC and I was in his office, I didn't have anything to do with it. Again, completely oblivious to political process. I had no idea whatsoever, what Mr. Nguyen was doing on the CBC, because they kept it separate, as it has to be per the ethics rules and the FEC rules. I mean, there can't be any federal staff that's working on actual campaign activity, except for those designated senior staff that are allocated to do so. I was a designated senior staffer allowed to do so in Mr. Meeks' office. But what ended up happening was Mr. Nguyen lost his election to Donna Edwards, and so he had a few months to go before he had to end his term, and so it was I proposed to Mr. Meeks, and amongst others, I said, look, I think you should be, the chair of the CBC PAC, because he sat on the board. And so after some discussions, and I remember Carolyn Cheeks Kilpatrick was the chair. After some, I remember I sat in her office and was like, Congressman, we got to make this happen. And so we ended up having him elected to chair of the CBC PAC. And at that time they had an exec director that they had, but I was still doing.
Who else was in the running, members wise?
I don't really know. I mean, because I think after Mr. Nguyen had lost his primary, it just kind of was. He was focused on other things, so they had it was sort of dormant, to be quite honest with you. So I mean, they hadn't really been doing a lot. I know that they had 1 or 2 fundraisers, but they hadn't been doing quite a lot. So when Mr. Meeks took it over. He modeled it a lot after some of the things that he had been doing in his own fundraising, which I had been, helpful and instrumental in. And so then from there, he takes over the chairmanship, and he just, we start to roll from there. Now, we had an executive director at that time. Her name was Jessica Knight, who was the ED for a number of years. But I would work a lot with Jessica on the fundraising structure. But again, back to the point, the disparities were still there. It was always still there. And so, my point was just that, like, I was very adamant about just always making sure that, we call those disparities out. And so, years later, when Jessica, goes on to greener pastures, Mr. Meeks felt like we had a long conversation, because I won't lie, I hemmed and hawed for a long time on taking the job as being exec director. I really did. And it ended up being one of the best things I could have done. Best decision I could have professionally have made. And from there, I just was just very adamant in just making sure that not only were the disparities talked about, but also that, there was a sharing of information, if you will, with other people who were in those similar positions. Because at the end of the day, things can happen over here, but yes, you keep it separate and everything, but if you know what's happening, and you have to work cohesively, essentially. So that's my big thing.
I got a question about when you start talking about raising money, when you start talking about fundraising for candidates. I think a lot of the general public, and even kind of relating back to the podcast with like the hip hop generation, they immediately, they've turned lobbyists into a bad word.
Oh God, yeah.
And so the average person just assumes lobbyists, they think lobbyists, some big corporate overseer who's coming in and you need to vote this way or you don't get this money. Or why do political candidates need my personal money, or why do they need to go get money from businesses and so forth? But I know me being on this, and I used to think that way before I got here, and you realize, no, everybody has interests. Just because somebody gives you money doesn't mean you have to do whatever they say. Doesn't mean you're beholden to them. You can give back people's money. People donate money all the time. That doesn't mean you can give it back. you can get $2 from a old lady in your district. You can get the maximum thousands of dollars that you can get from a PAC. Can you kind of talk about just what it means to raise, like, one, why do candidates need to constantly always be raising money?
Yeah.
And then two, what that process means, like if I give X candidate, I'm a company or I'm a lobbyist, I give X candidate money, what do they expect in return?
Well, let me say this. Let me backtrack. By my estimation in politics and having done this in a number of different capacities, from a policy standpoint to a lobbying standpoint and from a fundraising standpoint, I can say this. In my humble opinion, I feel like politics is comprised of three different things. And it's going to be, sound policy making, and being able to get bills and legislation passed, being able to effectively articulate that message to constituents and people who vote on that policy that you get passed, and the money to do so. To answer your question about why do candidates need so much money, it's funny because while I would love to see public financing with Citizens United, it's just not going to happen at this point. With the rise of after Citizens.
And for the people, you can Google Citizens United. There was a game changing Supreme Court decision that essentially allowed companies unlimited donations
for independent expenditures. Yeah,
exactly.
And so after Citizens United, it's essential. I mean, it's one of those things where you can have a race. I mean, I was talking to Congressman Stephen Horsford, not too long ago, and he was former for a second.
He was former for a minute.
For a second because he's back. Allowing the recent doers. Yeah. But and I'm talking to him, and it's like one of those things where he's raising in his PAC millions of dollars, and the DCCC is helping him raise millions of dollars, but yet every election cycle, he gets an ad or IE just run against him for $2-3 million, from the Koch brothers or whoever, Sheldon Addison, whoever, and they'll run these huge ads against him, and it's just like, how do you fight that? And the thing is that it has to be essential. You have to do that in order to either fight in a competitive campaign or to prevent anybody running against you, essentially. And that's in big and small markets. I've seen some races in small markets where take a perfect example. I mean, you look at I want to say Georgia 4-7
the special election.
Special election before Lucy McBath won. John Ossoff, the most special election.
He raised like $9-10 million and lost.
It was almost that election. I believe almost was like $60 million. $60 million total spent. Wow. That was $60 million in that election, one election, and so and that's all money that just gets poured in ads and direct mail and all kinds of different means, and so in TV and stuff. So that money is one of those things where until that is changed, it's gonna be essential. You have to have that.
I got a question, and this is something I've asked other guests. And it's one of my propositions of why I think hip hop is probably the most powerful, untapped political force in the country right now. Do you think we can counteract? Because a lot of that money is spent on direct ads, it's spent on Google ads, it's spent on social ads, Facebook ads, and fundraising, emails, in addition to TV, YouTube videos, ads, and so forth. Do you think there's a space to kind of counteract that money if we really got tapped into the celebrities? We really tapped into people who have larger social followings, the YouTubers, hip hop artists, like the industry. If we got them behind, I don't know if they're going to get behind every candidate, but behind maybe bigger causes or things that can, I've got millions of followers and I can push that out. Do you think there's a space for that? Or?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, I would say this, man. I'm old school. I remember Vote or Die in 2004. It's like I take a throwback.
I still got one of those Diddy shirts.
I had the shirt, right. I had the shirt, right. But no, I mean, it's absolutely a space. And here's the thing. And when I say yes and no, it's like yes in the sense that it can be can be influential, and we've seen every 4 years, especially in Obama, because it was cool back then. You know, when celebrities come in and they influence people and they turn people out to vote. However, it's two issues. Number one is just the glaring fact that celebrity does not always equal turnout and votes. It just doesn't. You know, you have to put some real infrastructure that's actually getting people registered, that's actually targeting. So you have to have the money to actually do a lot of the necessary infrastructure and the things that to actually turn people out to vote. Because just because people coming out to a concert, a free concert, doesn't mean that person's going to automatically get out to vote. And you actually have to educate people as well. And so that's when that's the key point. I mean, you got to educate people. You have to, effectively use, the community. But again, the money part is a big deal. It's a huge deal. And so I think that, one of the things that the other side is really good at is just collectivizing, collecting that money. And as a fundraiser, I can tell you, one of the things that I saw in the last election cycle, it was beautiful to me because, as I mentioned, when I came in, as the CBC PAC Exec Director in 2013, there was no other real African American leadership PACs out there, and I should point out that
we had any.
None.
Yeah.
And so, if they were really small, and so
not giving out the money,
because they didn't have the money to give.
Right.
And so to see, the rise of the collective PAC and Black Economic Alliance and Black PAC and Higher Heights, man, it's been beautiful. It's beautiful because we don't have to just solely say, okay, we got one place to give our money. You got multiple places to give you money. And it doesn't have to just be for one particular cause because Black people aren't just a monolithic. Yeah, we're not just a monolithic.
We're not all one big. Yeah. We're not all one big candidate. We don't all have one single.
And neither is the CBC, I might add. And so it was beautiful to see. This and I hope that in 2020 we continue to do that. But to address one other thing that you said though is that we have to continue to do this every year. It can't just be every 4 years, we come to the game and you get celebrities and entertainers engaged because, the issues that we face on every day from inadequate access to healthcare and police brutality and so and down the line, that doesn't stop with just a 4-year election cycle. That's your local elections. That's your governor's races. And so I think that's one of the things where the education component is really critical, is that we have to educate these celebrities, really educate these celebrities on the political process, and so money and actually getting sound legislative policy, all of that stuff comes into it and plays a role. And to get back on one other thing I want to just point to about the lobbyists and the Black lobbyist thing, because I really am hyper adamant about this. As somebody who has lobbied, as Mike as well, here's the thing I want to explain about lobbying, especially for Black people. Oftentimes, a lot of these companies that have Black lobbyists would not bring Black issues to the forefront if it was not for the African American lobbyists. When Black lobbyists come to members of the Congressional Black Caucus and talk to them on behalf of their company, Black members come back to them as well, and best believe the CBC members come to them and they're bringing those issues of how your diversity numbers looking. What are you doing in these communities of color? What are you doing that's going to affect these? And so I think that gets lost in a larger conversation when you start to talk about, all lobbyists do is represent bad corporate interests. No, there's a huge contingent of Black.
I always try to tell people, everyone has a lobbyist. The climate has a lobbyist. Like environmentalists have a lobbyist. Like if you're trying to get anything done, if you're trying to get anything done in healthcare, you're trying to get anything done in social justice, everybody has somebody lobbying for the issue, and they're not all big fat cats making $2 million a year or something crazy.
Absolutely.
You need those people who are to essentially lobby to go to those members of Congress, to go to your state houses and your governors, state houses, your general assemblies, city councils. You need people to talk to your members because they're out in the field. They got a lot to do. So if certain issues aren't brought to the forefront, if the work you're doing and the work others are doing is not brought to the forefront, then sometimes those elected officials don't even know or don't realize, like, hey, there's a lot of energy behind this. People are really paying attention to this. Or some of the companies that are in my district or in my area, they're really paying attention to this. So.
Absolutely. And it's not just and it's absolutely not a case where, oh, I'm giving you a $5,000 check or $2,500 check, and the member of Congress or whoever is gonna just do vote a certain way or advocate on whatever issue you're trying to advocate.
But it happens sometimes.
Yeah,
on paper, when you look at it, some people can think that, but it happens sometimes.
I mean, I get it. I mean, and you're absolutely right in that. Sometimes people. The American people's voice, it does feel like the voice of the American people are average everyday American is drowned out. But again, at the end of the day, you're absolutely, Cam, I think you go back to your point. Everybody does have a lobbyist. Whether you're advocating on higher labor standards for the average everyday American, clean air, homeless. Yeah. Everyone has somebody that is advocating for them, and whether it's they might not just call it lobbying, they might call it public policy or advocacy, but everybody has somebody who they're lobbying on getting lobbied on behalf of them. So, yeah.
Can you? Mike, I think Mike, you had a question.
Oh, yes, I did. Man, you work with you hear a lot of buzzwords when you live here in D.C. So around D.C. we hear about PACs and we hear about caucuses. Can you tell people what's the difference between a PAC and a caucus?
Yes.
So they know that they're not.
Or like the CBC PAC, the CBC Caucus.
Okay, so a caucus, for our purposes in Congress, is a federally taxpayer-funded group or organization that is, designed to advocate, speak on behalf of one particular group or entity, or issue-based advocacy. So you might have, an environmental caucus or the Congressional Black Caucus or the Hispanic Caucus, but their goal is to specifically represent within the confines of the U.S. House of Representatives or U.S. Senate that particular issue or group. As it relates to the Congressional Black Caucus, there are 4 entities. You have the parent policy-making, taxpayer-funded, Congressional Black Caucus, which the Congressional Black Caucus itself is funded within, is a member-funded organization within amongst the members of Congress to help to as a
push their agenda.
Yeah, to push their own agenda, and then you have the CBC Foundation, which is a 501c4, which is a nonprofit arm, and they do a number of different events, as folks mentioned, CBC Week, but correct pronunciation is the annual legislative conference. Yes. God damn it.
CBCF.
Damn it.
We should call it prom for grown folks.
But
say that again.
Prom for grown folks. Prom for grown folks.
Oh Lord, grown people freaknik.
Freaknik I can't. Freaknik and suits. I was about to say.
But but they do a number of different initiatives and programs through the CBCF, such as the CBCF Scholarship Program, which they house a number of different students here in DC. They give them stipends, and there's a number of programs, and the goal is to have a pipeline for them to be go from the Hill to be congressional staff. So a number of folks who are, very successful were former CBCF interns. Yeah, and then you have the Fellows Program as well.
David Johns was a fellow.
Yeah. And then you have the CBC Institute, and the
Benny
Institute,
Thompson.
yes, which is chaired by
captain.
Congressman Benny Thompson. CBCF is chaired by Congressman Cedric Richmond from New Orleans. And so the CBC Institute, they are the C4 arm. So think tank or policy arm. And so one of the programs that they do is they have the CBCF boot camp, and so their goal is to train the next generation of political leaders. So it's essentially the political version of what the CBCF's scholarship program is, whereas CBCF, you're intern and you go to the Hill. CBCI, you go out to campaigns and you work on different campaigns, but they also do a number of different policy sessions and leadership workshops for business folks and folks down in the different communities. They've also taken the the boot camp regionally. So in addition to, it used to be here in D.C., but they're actually taking it to different parts throughout the region. And then you have the CBC PAC, which is a direct political arm. So, when I started, if I'm being completely honest, the CBC PAC, when it came to the other organizations, they didn't have quite as big of a name and as much of a following as the others. And, one of my goals was just to, sort of
that image.
Yeah, was to, create my own lane and sort of, and that's, as you mentioned, connecting. I mean, that was, a lot of that was was a grind for me. It was like, being in the room and just making sure my presence was felt. And so, when I started, we started with, sort of modest means, and we had a mold that we had been using for a while, but we had to evolve, over time,
technology.
Had to catch up with technology, and as fun, and
people
that's,
don't write checks no more.
Yeah, people don't write checks. Yeah, people do it online, and fundraising evolved, and so we had to evolve with that fundraising, and so with the way we did fundraising, and so traditionally at that point it was host an event, have a donor write a PAC check, and and have a member attend the event, and then from there you got cash in the bank and you write a check out to whatever candidate it may be. That mold was eventually became outdated, and so we had to evolve, with that mold. And so
tell me real quick, when you needed to raise some money from someone, what would you tell them? Why should someone give money to the CBC PAC? What was your mantra? What was your answer to that?
Depends on when you ask me. I mean, I had to have it depends on what year you asked me or what part of my tenure. At the beginning, my thing was like, look, my thing was like I would go to people who, the CBC, various CBC members had supported, or people that had supported the CBC's issues, and that we were aligned. They were aligned with our respective issues. Eventually, it was like, look, this is what we've done as a PAC. This is what we've done, and this is what we can do if we have your support. And so it went from doing events around DC and trying to get people engaged and create a buzz around different events in DC. And I mean, I got initially I got a little bit of flack because I spent a little bit more money trying to bolster up our events to just bring attention to it. To it goes from there to taking the show on the road to saying no, hey, you see how we went from 40 whatever members of Congress to another 46 and eventually became 55. You see how this was done. This is what we do. This is who we support, and this is who we partner with, and this is how it gets done. And so
those are numbers you're speaking of. Black members of Congress,
correct.
Okay.
Correct. But another thing is that it was really important was just that we really had to tell our story, and our story was that there was this notion that the CBC PAC, as a Democratic PAC, we only supported Black members of Congress, which wasn't the case. And so,
It isn't? I thought you only supported members of the No,
not at all.
Hey, I'm learning something.
No, I mean, we gave more money. We gave, half and not more money to non-candidates of color last year than we did African American Black candidates, because but that's part of the thing is like, look, in addition to supporting candidates of color, because obviously that's the number one priority, but no, it's like, look, we are here for a Democratic majority, and you don't get that by just solely focusing on Black people. And so one of the goals that I had last Congress and last cycle was we worked very closely with Chairman Lujan and and the DNC. And my thing was like, look, we can't just solely focus on Black members of Congress. We'll handle that as show you. However, we have to have an overall 50-state Black strategy or on engaging African Americans. And so that doesn't just stop with cities where it's a majority African Americans. That's going into places like Kentucky, where you now got Sharice Davis. That's going to places like my hometown and where I went to school in Norfolk, Virginia. Where you get the Elaine Lauriers, and in Richmond, Virginia, and these sort of places where you might have very small African American populations, or 5 and 6%. But if you figure half of a district or something is going to turn out to vote, that's almost 10% of your Democratic electorate. So you really have to start to engage them. You can't just write those folks off or just go to a church at the end of the cycle and act like that's going to, pass a collection plate like that's going to get you. No, you really got to engage these people. And so I think that, that was one of the things why I feel like, we were able to be really successful last cycle, was because that's what we were able to focus on, not just focusing on CBC members.
Quick question: do you get more? Does the CBC PAC get more money when the person in the White House is from the opposite party, or do you get more money when the person in the White House is from your party?
That's interesting. It was funny, like when I was there, I was there I was there on the downside on the last part of the Obama presidency, and so, but we didn't have a supermajority at that point. Right now they're cleaning up. They're doing really well, because the Democrats have the House. Now we're still not a supermajority, but we have at least one house in Congress. So I mean, for us, it really didn't at that point. It really didn't. I think now it probably would, because we really started to ramp up the online program prior to me leaving. I left it in good hands. Like Yolanda Addison's the new ED. She's killing it. They're doing a lot of money, and their emails are popping. They're really rolling. But and I think left them in good hands, man. But I think at the time it didn't really affect us as much, just because we just had because they were focused on we're focused on Congress, so we didn't have a majority. Yeah, so
interesting. Well, before we get into your top five, my last kind of political question is around this week. It being the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's annual legislative conference, the Super Bowl of Black politics, adult freaknik in suits. But then also pace yourself and hydrate. Pace yourself and hydrate. I think next year, maybe we might have to edit that. We're going to edit that out of the podcast so people don't steal that idea. But, and like I said, as a veteran of a person, like you've been instrumental behind some of the biggest receptions, some of the biggest panels, in bringing a lot of people to the city, into the conference. What do you see as what is the importance of this week? Like, why should people care? If, especially, I want you to kind of speak specifically more to like the hip hop generation. Like, I had to explain to Trey the Truth, I mean, he didn't know what this was. Like, it's not in his wheelhouse.
But why would you think he would know it? Why would you expect him to know it?
I didn't expect, but I'm saying I had to explain to him, like, the importance of it, who comes, why it's a big deal. I mean, he's like, he had loosely heard of something, and like, because T.I. has performed and been at the Icon Talks. He's been signed to T.I. before, so he loosely heard of it. But it caught me. I was like, man, yeah, I bet you there's a ton of artists, and not just artists. There's a ton of just kids, students, adults, people who could tap into the energy this week. We could really make it what it's supposed to be in terms of really creating a national Black agenda and so forth. What do you see?
Snoop just fell.
What do you see as kind of the importance, like why people should tune into this?
Here's my thing. One of the if anything good has come out of your president being in.
Hold on, why are you my president?
Hey man, ain't mine. Fuck that.
I just say 45.
Fuck that dude.
45.
But if anything has come out of that has been good, is that you've seen a rise of activists and people that are actually a lot more engaged, especially in the hip hop community. And so with that, one of the things that I would say about this weekend, it's like, look, if you want to make a change, or if you want to even start to have a discussion about having a change in your local community, and you want to talk to your local representative, your member of Congress, or the people, and most importantly, the people who are able to actually make that change happen from a policy standpoint, be in the room, be able to rub shoulders and actually come to them and say, look, I'm somebody who has a voice. This is the place to do it. This is the place and the time to do it. And and you go back and you're able to take this back to your communities, because oftentimes, some of these members may or may not know who Trader Truth is. I would hope that, the members in Houston and stuff know who they are. But again, this is the time to not only, have that interaction happen, but number two, show that visible solidarity to other people that it's actually happening, to people who are going to follow Trader Truth, to somebody who's going to follow Sheila Jackson Lee. That's your mesh. That's you say, okay, wow, this is actually what's happening here. And so yes, parties is great. I love to party, drink something, smoke something. But outside of this is a point, and this is the time and the place to where these things need to get done. And that's why it becomes critical. You have a very unique place where you can get entertainers, policymakers, thought leaders, think tanks, people from think tanks, and just folks who are just active and want to be engaged and want to just be advocates for change, all in the same room, all in the same place, to where you can just build and break bread. And you mentioned connecting and just and having people network. That's what this is about, man. I mean, literally, it's just literally like about having people saying, hey, it's beautiful because you can get black people walking down, hey, look, where you from? What you do? What do you do? And it's fine with that. It's fine to say that because, we're all here we all should be here for the same collective purpose, and it's not a one size fits all. I mean, it's, you don't just have issue forums where they're just talking about, we're just talking about healthcare, or we're just talking about no, you have, every member has a different issue forum and panel. And so whatever your issue might be, whether you
it's represented.
It's represented. And so it's rare where you have that much power in the room and that many people where you can, and influencers and folks who can actually, be in the same room to actually have those conversations. In Black America, that's very rare. And so where's this collective thing where we're trying to, get something done, for whatever respective issue. So that's why it's important to me.
Well, thank you. And I think that sums it up well. Yeah, I totally agree. And it's just an opportunity to build that solidarity both inside and outside. Because I think it's not just non-black people who are looking at it. It's a ton of other black people around the country who don't know about it. But if they can see that, and they can see things coming out of it, they can see not just the rhetoric, but some real action. And like you said, people are coming from all over the country who might not be in this every day, but they're able to bring something back to their community. They're able to bring something back to their local churches, their city council meetings, to their whatever nonprofit or social justice meeting that they might have in their local community. They're able to bring some of those learnings back. They can go to these workshops, figure things out that, I didn't know how I could do that. I didn't know how to raise this kind of money. I didn't know how to create this online petition. I didn't know how to lobby for certain changes in laws and so forth.
Yeah, and I mean, it goes back to what you're saying. I mean, folks don't know, folks don't know what's happening. You have to really got to educate people, and I just wish that it happened more often and it was more of a medium for this to happen, regionally and more often, so.
Well, we're going to end off with the hardest question, something that we ask all of our guests. Mike, did you have any more? Did you have any more on this?
I talk to Ben almost every day, so we're fine.
Well, the people don't know. We're trying to bring some of this conversation to the people.
I'm pretty sure I've seen him plenty of times this week in passing.
Yes, sir.
Top 5 dead or alive.
Top 5 dead or alive.
Top 5. This is your top 5. You define. Step up to the mic, but you define that as however you define that. It doesn't have to be the best lyricist. It doesn't have to be the biggest. Just who's your top 5?
Y'all made me think on this one, because it's often.
Oh, he got notes.
Yeah, I appreciate. I got
notes. Hold up. You just raised the standard for all of our guests now. Please, I take notes. They need to have notes.
I got notes on this. So my top 5, in order. Okay.
Oh, in order.
In order. Actually, no. Just because. Yeah. All right. Top 5. Okay. Rakim. Okay.
Got it.
Rakim. Tupac.
Okay.
Andre 3000.
Wait, no, but not who's Big Boy?
I can't. Not.
But Andre wouldn't have been.
I know, but just the but
just check it.
You can have them as one. You can put them as one, or you can separate them.
No, I got it. Okay. It's his 5.
And then the last 2, I got Jay and I got Biggie. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, he's got a
Brooklyn's
for those who are
finest,
just
that's all I'm
listening. He has a
Brooklyn's finest,
one
that's
of
all
the
I'm saying.
rare pictures of they were on vacation, I think, somewhere.
This was from the I guess one of the Jay-Z videos.
Oh, that was from the Feeling It video.
Yeah,
From the or was that Ain't No Nigga?
Yeah, I think it was Ain't No Nigga.
Yeah. Where Biggie did a little cameo.
Yeah.
But he's got Brooklyn's Finest, one of the hardest songs ever made.
Yeah.
Okay. Jay-Z, Biggie, Rakim, Tupac, and Andre.
Just
Do you consider, I was like, you don't really have West Coast representation, but do you consider Tupac your West Coast representation?
I do consider Tupac the West Coast representation.
But you grew up in Virginia, so how did those five come to be your
Let me
top
explain something.
five?
Pusha T was almost close. Pusha T was like number 6, right? He was real close.
Why?
Just Push. Come on now. Grinding clips. I mean, hello.
And it's Virginia. I guess
It's
like
VA. I mean, you know.
my question is like being in VA, growing up, especially you say growing up in a small town, country VA, like how did those people like Rakim, did his music really make it down, or did you come to that like later
I
in
think
life?
For a long time, it was all about.
It's sort of like he asked you, did y'all have radio back where y'all
Right.
was at?
Yeah.
Hold up. That's not what I'm not
99.
trying to come with it like that, but it's like you talking about Rakim had. If you really look at the years, Rakim only had like a 5-year run where he was the man. Then after that, he was just legend.
We were fortunate because we were one of the only families on the block that had cable, so everybody would come over to my house and watch Yo MTV Raps. So yeah, I take it back, throwback. But so I mean, but Rakim, I mean, New York hip hop was very influential in the beginning of hip hop, and part of the reason why I even chose Rakim is because my thing is like if you were an influencer to anybody else who's popular, who's in your top 50, then that belongs. Then whoever that style came from belongs in your top 5. So
I give you that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, but yeah,
He changed the way rap was.
Yeah.
Rap was done.
We had Microphone Fiend, Follow the Leader, Paid in Full. He had multiple styles. He had the slow flow with Paid in Full. Then he had the Microphone Fiend, sped it up, and Follow the Leader. So I definitely put him in the top 5.
And Andre 3 Stacks. I feel like he don't have enough. I love Andre 3000. I'm a huge Outkast fan, but to me he doesn't. He can't be in my top 5 because he doesn't have enough solo material.
I'm gonna break it down for you. The South got something to say. That's all I'm saying. I'm gonna say
One
this.
of the most legendary shout outs ever.
Because my thing was like I didn't get onto Outkast until probably about the second or third album, and then I had to go back and actually listen. Because I remember I heard Bombs Over Baghdad, and I was like, what the hell? And he was like, intro, national. Yeah. And then I had to actually go back and listen. And the contrast between him and Big Boy, like, Big Boy was very much like, Cadillacs and, hustling. And Andre was just the very beginning, again, influencer. And, influencer, you got commercial success. But he was one of the first. If you think about the MCs that were able to actually come out and just talk about how they felt without necessarily saying much, or he was just able to kind of like, be very theoretical, philosophical. He was one of the first MCs to do that, but he also did it from the South. So that was kind of like one of the Atlanta, yeah.
And the South got something to say.
South got something to say.
When that's gonna be forever in hip hop's lore. Well, Benjamin Branch, appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you, brother.
Thank y'all for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you. This was fun.
Come back, man.
You can come back.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
as we continue to upgrade and elevate on the podcast.
I'm happy to be here.
Yes, thank you for coming in. Did you have any announcements? Anything you wanted to say, share with the people? I know you're not super heavy on social, so I don't know if you want to share that, but you can share whatever. This show.
Warden 1911 is my IG.
Oh my gosh, you guys lucky.
I did it. That's right. I did it. That's right. Same thing with Twitter.
4 followers.
Oh no, this is you're an example of a person who's like, I'm actually popping and doing my thing in real life. So whatever is going on in the internet,
putting my life out there.
No, like everybody. It's funny. I talked to my dad bringing him in. I'm like, Dad, he's the bishop of the state of Indiana. I'm like, you've got 250,000 people who you oversee over several hundred churches. He's like, but I'm trying to figure this. I'm like, Dad, you got a real audience, of real people.
Let me just say this real quick before we wrap. You know, I know part of this was, you know, to talk about, you know, connecting and, you know, my you know, me being able to connect people and engage them in the fundraising process. But I just want to talk to anybody who's, you know, an intern or staff assistant, or, you know, maybe listen to this and you know, you're not the best student in school or what have you. You know, my thing is like this: keep at it, keep grinding, stay focus on what your vision is, and you will eventually get there. You know, it may not be, you know, the next person's path or the next person's track, but, you know, just listen to my story. Literally, you know, I'm not proud of my grades out of high school, but, you know, the fact that I'm able to know members of Congress by name and they know me by name, and I have a name here is nothing short of God's grace and just, you know, perseverance. So I just encourage anybody to just, you know, keep at it, and, you know, and to just make sure, you know, you're in the room and you just keep grinding. And everybody, no matter what position you're at on the Hill or otherwise, you know, you're somebody and you're influencing somebody.
And keep your integrity, your word, your honesty. That's another thing I can say about you, that you've always been a person, when you can do it, you can do it. And when you can't, you be straight up, hey, I can't. But like being a man of your word, being a woman of your word, keeping your integrity, especially in this crazy political space, grinding, like those things really count. And those really, they come back. I mean, they come back full circle. So as we wrap up, thank you, Ben, for sharing.
Absolutely.
Mike, did you figure out if you want to announce now?
We got a few events coming up for CBC this week. My Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett is having a Future of Cannabis and Hemp panel with some great panelists. One of them was Amani Toomer, who just was an NFL player.
Oh, for the Giants, yeah.
He has a farm and things like that. And then we're going to also have a Caribbean Day Party on Thursday from 12 to 3 at Succotash. The panel is also on Thursday from 10 to 12 in room 103B at the Convention Center. And then you want to announce that one? You announce that one. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, what? The hip politics? Again, just going back to the first.
It's going to be a busy day.
Yeah, Thursday's going to be a huge day. The Hip Politics Congressional Awards reception. Like I said, we're jumping off of the podcast screens and your airwaves right into the real world. We're going to be honoring a bunch of change makers, that people who. We're partnering with the Black Millennials for Flint, a wonderful nonprofit that has done a lot of work on trying to fight the lead crisis in a lot of inner cities, both in Flint and Baltimore and cities around the country. So we partnered with them where we're going to be honoring, we have the Hip Politics Awards and the Green Justice Awards, where we're going to be honoring Congressman Akeem Jeffries, the co-founder of the Congressional Hip Hop Caucus, Trey the Truth. We actually have another special guest I don't want to announce just yet. You kind of got to be there to see him. And then also Scarface, Brad Jordan, legendary hip hop artist and current candidate for city council. And then for the Green Justice Awards, a lot of green activists, social urban activists from around the country, and some elected officials as well, who've really put the climate and green justice on the forefront.
Everybody's going to want to know.
What?
Are these open bar?
Yes, we have VIP open bar for special invited guests and VIP, or you can also pay to be a supporter, to be VIP. But then we also, it's also open to the general public. It is space and venue, space limited due to venue capacity. Like we were talking earlier, we got like hundreds upon hundreds of RSVPs, so get there early. But if you can't make it out to those, I hope you to come out to the convention center, whether it be Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. Sit in some of these panels. Again, go to the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's website to get a full list and full rundown.
This flyer.
Man, stop talking about the flyer. Somebody just told me last night. They were like, whoever your graphic designer is on point. There's a lot of information. There's like 15 people you got to put on a flyer. That's not easy.
I just need to know what the date, where's it going to be at.
That's why it's in bold at the top, and then all the little extra. There's just a lot. I wanted something that had everybody.
Go to a flyer like this. Oh, look, straight to the point. Right?
They don't have anybody's name on it.
It's no, but those people. Well, I'm not gonna say that.
Okay, you know what, man? They're getting awards, and they've done a lot of work.
People should be able to read, man. Like just read the damn flyer, man.
I know, but look at this. Look at this down here.
All right. We're not about to trash this flyer on air. And with that, people, we're about to wrap up. It's been another episode of the Hip Politics Podcast. I believe this is episode 22 or 23. I'll see. You'll see. Your boy Cam Trimble, aka Mr. Hip Politics, and my co-host Michael McQuarrie, aka the Mayor of Capitol Hill. And then our special guest today, Ben Branch, former executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus Political Action Committee, PAC. And with that, we're signing off from Washington, D.C. in the shadows of Capitol Hill. We're out. Peace.